boy, howdy. Everybody out there in the interwebs of the world, um, welcome to fans.com and my interview with an incredible photographer named Michael Zagaris. I'm going to talk a little slow at the beginning here, let people get onto this stream for a second. Takes people to log in, take a minute to log in, but I'll start with some of the nuts and bolts of doing these broadcasts, which is the thank yous. So first of all, I want to thank the folks at fans.com, which is part of Pete Shapiro's organization, which is Relix Magazine, the Capitol Theater, the Brooklyn Bowls, Lock-In Festival, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, Pete Shapiro, for giving us this platform to present these cool live music, live interview type experiences for all of us that are at home, hanging out, quarantined, and sheltered in place at the moment on a Sunday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I want to thank Jonathan Healy. Jonathan works for Pete Shapiro and Dayglow. He's directing today's presentation, and he's the guy that's bringing you all of this live music that you're seeing on fans.com and the Cap site and all the JRAD stuff and all this great music that's coming out, Mo, a couple weeks ago, et cetera, et cetera. And his team, of course, Steph May and marketing, and Harrison, who's going to be helping us with questions at the end of today, and Camilla, and really everybody who works at the Cap and the Brooklyn Bowl. Thank you. We love you. We miss you. We can't wait till we get back and we get to rock and roll. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking to a guy named Michael Zagaris, and Michael has been a friend of mine for over 30 years. And so Michael is a rock and roll photographer and a sports photographer. He's been working with the Oakland A's and the San Francisco 49ers for decades. We'll get more into that later when we get to the sports section of this. We're going to start out with his rock and roll work. And you can see over here is a copy of his most recent book, which is called Total Excess. And I believe that book is still in print, and there's some copies left, not a lot. So if you like what you hear today and you want to get his book, go to your online bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, et cetera, and order a copy of Total Excess by Michael Zagaris. You can find Michael on Instagram at Michael Zagaris and follow along with what he's posting and the stuff that he's got going on. And of course, I'm at Jay Blakesberg at Instagram, and I have a new Instagram as well called Retro Blakesberg that my daughter Ricky Blakesberg is curating, and it's only my photographs that I shot on film. There's only no digital photos, everything that I shot on film, which was, I shot 1 million pictures on film. So she's got a lot of content to work for. We scanned about 80 or 90,000 of those. So she's just posting that. So check that out, Retro Blakesberg. So back in the day, in the 80s, when we were all shooting film as professional photographers, we shot what was called slide film, transparency film, chrome film. And there was a specific lab here in San Francisco where we got that film developed, and that was called the New Lab. And the New Lab was beyond a place to just go and get your film developed. It was a social vortex. It was our scene. It was a part of our culture. And so you could go into the New Lab on any day of the week. And if you were there in the late afternoon, and so first of all, slide film, when it's developed, it comes out, it's mounted, it's in slides. If it's medium format, it's transparencies, they're bigger, but you don't have to make prints. And any professional magazine or book or anybody that was publishing anything worked from transparencies. They were positives, not negatives. And they would scan from those. And so if you were at the New Lab any day of the week, Monday through Saturday, around 3 p.m., there was a whole insane vortex going on of all these photographers getting their film out from being developed, which happened in a 2-hour interval, and madly editing their pictures so that they could package them up and run down the street 2 blocks away to FedEx and get them into the FedEx before the 5 p.m. deadline. We would be walking into FedEx at 4:59 p.m. and handing off FedEx packages. And this is before you remember this, Zagaris, right?
Oh, yeah.
Listen,
I remember way even before that, but yeah, it was crazy. The hard thing was doing that and not getting a ticket, because the fucking meter maids were everywhere and there was no parking.
Right, and you were double parked. So anyway, so this is before you filled out a FedEx air bill online. You were filling it out by hand. But if you were in the New Lab, right, literally there are photographers that are editing, getting ready to FedEx photographs to everywhere from Time, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone, Spin, Musician, Fortune, Forbes, Business Week, Playboy, every single major magazine. This lab, the New Lab, was that vortex. You were hanging out, and it was a social scene. And when you were hanging out and you were looking at these people's work, you were seeing some of the best work in the country. When we were visiting photographers in San Francisco, people like Annie Leibovitz would go to the New Lab. She would send her assistants, but everybody's film that was anybody ran through the New Lab, right? And so that's where I met Jim Marshall, the legendary photographer. That's probably where I met Zagaris. And when Zagaris, actually, it's funny, I learned about Burning Man for the first time at the New Lab. There was a guy named Bill Reitzel, San Francisco Bay Area photographer, and he was looking at film. He had just got from this thing called Burning Man. It was the first or second year that it was in the desert. There were a few thousand people there, and he was trying to explain how they were going to light this thing on fire, and he was waiting for that film to come out next. But it was such a scene. And so, when somebody like Jim Marshall walked in, he was a legend. Everybody could stop in their tracks. And when Zagaris walked in, it was the same thing. People would turn their heads. It was like a fashion model walking down the street. We would all turn our heads because Zagaris was in, and he was just maybe back from bringing in his film from a 49ers game on a Monday morning, or maybe he was coming from an Oakland A's game that just ended, and he was dropping off his film, right? And the thing about the New Lab is, when you were a newbie photographer, they had these boxes where they put your developed film in. Right. And so they had, lettered boxes by last name, A through G, H through P, whatever, by the alphabet. But if you were somebody like Michael Zagaris, you had your own box. It said Michael Zagaris, and they put his film in his box. Now, when I was going in there in the mid 80s, I was just part of, A through G for Blakesberg. Right. And then by the late 80s, by about 87, 88, when I was starting to shoot for Rolling Stone magazine and other places, I got my own box. And then I knew I had arrived, Zagaris, right? I knew I had a box, right? My box was there. So the New Lab was just this incredible, incredible place. And when Zagaris walked in, he literally was larger than life, right? And so this guy was a legend. And when he started to tell a story, everybody gathered around him. It was just an incredible time. It was rich. It was vibrant. It was creative. So on that note, I want to introduce you guys to Michael Zagaris, my dear friend. He lives here in the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco for many, many years. Welcome, Michael, to fans.com and Total Excess, the rock and roll photography of Michael Zagaris.
After that intro, man, I'm glad I've got a window open because it was getting pretty deep in here.
Those were the days, right?
No, they were. And you know what? I mean, I think we all thought it was going to go on forever and ever. And it was actually a very short, compact window. But yeah, really, really great times.
I miss that time where we would all mingle at the film lab. Now that we're all sitting in front of our computers, editing our own pictures, it's like a very different vibe now, right? It's like, you know, we're isolated. We're not seeing that work, you know, fresh out of the chemistry the way we did, and don't have that camaraderie that we used to have, you know?
Well, I mean, one thing for sure, the one constant on the planet is change. Nothing remains the same. I mean, you could take that a step further. I mean, how many people interact? How many people have conversations? I mean, when the internet started, people would email and now text. When I talk to people, sometimes late 20s, early 30s, talk to them, they're almost like, oh, conversation. What do we do? You know, it's with a lot of trepidation. So yeah, right. It was a totally different universe.
Yeah. So let's get into some of your photography and some of your photography stories. So this first photo that we have up here is a picture of JFK, John F. Kennedy. And I believe this was taken in September of '63, which would be your senior year in high school. You borrowed your dad's camera. I believe it was a Nikon. Tell me a little bit about this photo and what this photo means to you, your career, and the direction you took over the next few years once you left Bellarmine Prep, which was the high school you went to in, I think, San Jose, and then were, you know, in law school in Santa Clara. Give us a little bit of a snapshot from, like, you know, high school '63 to like '68.
Well, I mean, when I took that picture, I had been taking pictures from the time I was about 4 or 5 years old, never with the thought that I was going to be doing this for a living. I always enjoyed documenting things. And a friend of the family was an attorney in Reading whose brother was the JFK's Secretary of the Interior. He was coming to town when we lived in Reading, California at that point in time, and he was dedicating Whiskeytown Dam. So I borrowed my dad's camera, went there. In those days, they had Secret Service, but it was nothing like it is now. And I remember seeing Larry Carr on stage after President Kennedy landed with Ed Reagan, who was a state senator, Biz Johnson. There were people like that. And I actually yelled up to Larry Carr, and, you know, I worked my way almost to the front. I mean, now I would have been thrown on the ground on my face. And I was able to take, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 pictures before I was finally moved back. But it was, you know, I was there. I loved JFK, and I was a fan. And it was also, like so many things I shot, it was stuff that I was drawn to. I loved the energy, and I was always curious. I found as I went on, the camera is a great entree to whatever you want to do.
You know, it's funny. I have a story about that. So I photographed Bill Clinton when he was dedicating the Presidio to San Francisco when they were passing it over from federal land to the city of San Francisco. And I was shooting for the GGNRA, which is the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, not the National Rifle Association. And I got asked to go on the beach with Clinton and the head of the GGNRA. And one Secret Service guy let me through. The other guy didn't know. And I was in a headlock, like literally in 5 seconds. And I'm like, no, that guy over there said I could do it. But the other thing about being an entree, I was in college. I was photographing the Olympic marathon women's trial run. The first time there was going to be a women's Olympic marathon in '84, right? Joni Benoit, remember that? And right. I was at the stage, the podium where they were going to give the medals to the 3 people that were going to go to the Olympics. And there was the governor of the state of Washington was up there with us. And there was this photographer next to me from Sports Illustrated. He was this heavy set, big fat guy, right? And he yells up to the stage. He's like, "Governor, get out of my picture," right? And I looked at him and I was just like, I want to be able to tell the governor of the state of Washington to get out of my picture someday. That's what I want to do, right?
Sure.
So it's like, it gives you that entree to do whatever you want sometimes, right? Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, I'd like to yell at Trump and say, hey, get out of my country.
There'd be a lot more I'd like to yell at him. So, all right. So anyway, so you get this picture in 63, and by 68, you're working with Robert Kennedy, aren't you?
Well, I was in law school and at Santa Clara. And in February, Gene McCarthy won in New Hampshire. A week later, Robert Kennedy announces that he's going to run for the presidency. I had worked in his office in Washington, D.C., and I thought, I've got to go back to work for him. I mean, and you've got to look at the backdrop of what was happening then. I had started law school in September. Really, by October, I thought, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Let me finish out the year and see what happens. 1968 was changing on the whole planet, politically, culturally, movies, music, all of this is going on. So I jump into Bobby's campaign. I stay in law school, but now I'm working first 2 days a week, then 3 days a week on his campaign. I'm totally engaged in that, but still have no idea what I'm going to do. Ended up flying down to Los Angeles because he had lost in Oregon the week before. And if he doesn't win in California, it's probably going to be Hubert Humphrey. We won in California. I'm at the Ambassador Hotel. I've got to fly back the next day because I've got a contracts final in law school. I'm really, like everybody else, ebullient, and I'm really doing nothing. I'm not taking pictures at the time. I'm working on the campaign. But I had sort of ingratiated myself when he came out through the kitchen. There's a big crowd of people. We ended up on the podium after he gives a very abbreviated speech. And in that room, it's a big ballroom, but it's got a low ceiling. It was incredibly hot. I remember I was sweating and I was soaking wet. I was in the back. I said to somebody, where are we going? And somebody said, I think we're going back upstairs to the suites. Well, there's some parties. Somebody else says, no, there's some buses outside. We're going to be going to another hotel. The senator's going to give a speech. So we came down like 2 little flights of stairs, started into the kitchen again. Just as we got to the door, I hear, it sounded like somebody let out a string of firecrackers. And Bill Epridge, who was behind me, a friend of mine, he was shooting for Life and Time magazine. He knocked me against the door, running past me, yelling 9mm. I thought, oh, that's like a fisheye lens. And
right.
Yeah, and I got maybe 3 steps, slipped, and I thought it was, there's oil. It was blood. And by this time it's pandemonium. And the person that was bleeding was the guy that was a union guy. Somebody said it. I found out later was Paul Schrade. It was insanity in the room. Right. I ended up having to fly the next morning from Los Angeles back to San Francisco and then drive to Santa Clara, where I had a contracts final. And I remember I was kind of in shock. I was numb.
Well, you're 20 feet away from Kennedy getting assassinated. I mean,
yeah. No, I didn't actually see him.
No, I know you were.
But I heard the shots and everything, and it was all people screaming, it was yelling. Yeah. And I tell people later on, there were so many shots fired. I mean, and I thought it was firecrackers. It turned out there were 8 more shots fired in the room that Sirhan's gun held bullets for. So now I'm at Santa Clara. They hand out the mimeograph sheet. I've got 8 blue books. I looked at the paper for, 10 minutes. And then I remembered in my wallet, I carried 2 wax headshots from Topps baseball cards. One, a headshot of Juan Marichal, the other one, of Roberto Clemente. So I took one out, put it on my top blue book, took out a quarter, transferred the face of Marichal onto the blue book, then drew a little loop, a little, blurb where you're talking. And I wrote, Mike, this is all bullshit. And I proceeded to fill 7 or 8 blue books with how America was fucked and murdered its leaders. that was the end of law school. And I was immediately reclassified one day. I remember my father was like,
right,
beside himself. He said, "Now, what the hell are you going to do now?"
Right. Well, I know what you're going to do now. So let's go to this next picture here. Right. And we got Jim Morrison lying on the ground and prancing around the stage. It's 1968. It's the Santa Clara Folk Rock Festival. And you're there and you're with a camera and you meet Jim Marshall and you get your first photographs of a rock legend. You're obviously a fan. It's 1968. Tell me about the importance of shooting this show for you and your career, and also about meeting Jim Marshall.
Well, again, I didn't even have a career at that point in time. I wanted to see this show. Besides the Doors, the Airplane, the Dead, Country Joe and the Fish, the Youngbloods, Ravi Shankar, Steve Miller and his band, Janice and Big Brother. Everybody was there, and I think it was like $3. And I was supposed to be working on the campaign that day, so I called in sick. I went to the show. There was a little, like, not actually a pit, but they had maybe a 10-foot area roped off in front of the stage. So I had my camera and finagled my way into the front of that pit area, and I had 2 rolls of film. My plan was I was going to shoot 1 frame for each band, and then maybe half of a roll for the Doors and the other half for Ravi Shankar. And as I'm shooting, there was this guy in a corduroy coat and a hat, and he was back and forth, had about 5 cameras, and he was, talking a lot of shit to people. And finally, midway through the show, there's a fraternity type guy that's trying to get him away. Jim yells at the guy and pulls it looked like almost like a Bowie knife, and put it up to the guy's throat. This is May 1968. It's pretty much peace and love. The guy practically shit his pants. And I'm standing behind Jim, and I said, "Hey, man, is that knife real?" And he turned and he puts the knife up on my throat. Then he reaches behind, pulls out of his back waistband a gun. He goes, "That's right, motherfucker. This is real, and so is this." And I said, "Who brings a gun and a knife to a rock festival?" He goes, "I do, motherfucker." And I said, "Who are you?"
And he's like
Jim Marshall. Who are you?
And he's like a foot shorter than you also. He comes up to like your chest and he's pulling a knife on you, right?
So right then it was like, I love this guy. And so he ended up taking me backstage, which at that point was a rope that, you just went under. And he's talking to people. And at that point, Jim Morrison and the Doors show up in a van. And I remember Jim got out, he's grabbing a cigarette, and Marshall said something, and Morrison said, "Jesus Christ, Marshall, you're here too." And I thought, God, this guy knows everybody. And that was my intro to Jim, and we became lifelong friends from that moment on.
Right on. A good friend to have, a legendary guy, of course. For those of you guys don't know Jim Marshall's work, take a look on the interwebs. He's the guy that shot the picture of Johnny Cash flipping the bird and Bob Dylan rolling the tire down the street in Greenwich Village, and of course the legendary photographs of the Grateful Dead on Haight Street in 1968 that are in the Live Dead record. But Jim was a crazy man. We all have incredible stories. Michael and Jim were good friends, and Michael can tell you some mind-blowing stories about Jim, and maybe we'll get to one of those later, just for fun, to kind of for kickers. But Jim was Jim loved to indulge in massive quantities of cocaine and things like that. And I think Michael liked to mess around with shit like that too at sometimes. So they were 2 peas in a pod. But let's move on here to, we got a couple of these photos of Jim Morrison here. And then we got a picture of Bill Graham standing in front of Winterland, closing of Winterland with the Grateful Dead and the Blues Brothers. Bill is pretty instrumental in your career as a rock photographer. Tell me about your relationship with Bill a little bit, some of the things that he kind of, handed to you, and what kind of relationship you had, and what you saw Bill in action, and sort of the magic that he created with his organization and some of his lieutenants, Peter Barsotti, who we'll talk about a little bit later with Led Zeppelin, and his brother Bop Arsodi. These were people that started working for Bill as teenagers and went on to become legendary concert guys. But talk to me about Bill and your time with Bill and your relationship with the company and him.
You know, I met Bill probably 6 months after I had started going to the Fillmore. And initially I'd go to the Fillmore once a week. Then I started going twice a week. Then they moved to the Fillmore West. Soon I was going 2-3 times a week. And it was not just because of the music. It was because of the scene. It was so much more than a music venue. It was a culture venue. It was a fashion venue. It was a people venue. I finally went to Bill's office early in an afternoon and talked to him. I wanted to work for him. And he said, I remember Bill says, well, what can you do? I said, whatever you want me to do. And I was just starting. I had a camera with me. I was taking pictures, but I was working on a book on English musicians and how they had come to America mainly using our blues roots and were changing our culture in turn while being changed by it. So Bill saw me all the time, didn't give me a job initially, but once I made the transition from working on this book and writing and taking pictures, he made it very easy to work at his venue. I could walk in with a camera. There was never any problems. I used to go backstage. When I was working on my book, this is how easy the access was in those days. I'm working on my book. I have a camera over my shoulder. I have a little tape recorder, and I'd have 2 or 3 joints in my pocket. I'd go backstage. Occasionally you'd meet the road manager, but you'd usually just run into Joe Cocker or Stevie Winwood. And I'd tell him I'm writing a book. We'd start talking. We'd go in, sit down. Sometimes it'd say, hey, we're staying at the Continental Lodge where most of the bands stayed in those days. Come on over. That's how easy it was. Bill was always there. He and I hit it off. I mean, I don't know why. It was chemistry. And it got to the point where once law school was done and I started first doing the book thing, then the photography, I was doing what I loved, but I had no money. A couple times, I mean, I couldn't pay rent. I went to Bill. I said, listen, I'm having a tough time right now. Do you think you could loan me like $100? And he said, you know, here's $300. When I'd go to pay it back, he goes, please, don't insult me like that. You're okay. But Bill, get out of my office. And that was, you know, a lot of people thought Bill was really heavy duty. He was, but he was also
heart of
gold. Yeah. And he took care of his people, especially if he thought you were a permanent member of the Fillmore family.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Jim Marshall was the same way. You know, Jim would pull guns on people and you know, threaten you with a knife because he didn't bring over the blow like you said you were gonna, or whatever it was. But I mean, Jim did so many grand things for so many people. You know, people that were his friends. If you were his friend, he would die for you. Jim would fucking lay his life down for you. And you know, and I think that Bill looked out for his people, and you know, and I'm sure that he appreciated, you know, Bill was one of those promoters that early on really understood the value of documenting what he was doing. He knew that it was a zeitgeist, that was a change in pop culture, and that he was at the forefront. And, you know, ultimately it's, you know, we all know that Bill was really the guy that reinvented the concert industry and, you know, set it on the course that it eventually took. And because there was really nobody before Bill that did modern day concert work the way that he did. So let me flip through a couple quick photos here that you took. You know, we'll kind of skip big stories on it, but you know, you got Garcia here. This was taken up at Bill's house. He put together a little press junket where he brought Garcia and Carlos Santana up to his house to kind of hang out and meet the press. And you were up there to take photos to send out to people. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Was this at the Continental Lodge, Michael, on the balcony?
No, that was by that time, everybody was staying at the Miyako Hotel.
Got it.
That was the new go-to hotel.
Right,
and
right
that
near the
was
Fillmore.
their first shot. They were playing Winterland for the first time. And Rolling Stone had called me, said, look, Tom Petty and his group are coming in. You're going to be in the Aku. They know about you. Come there, do some pictures for them.
Right.
And, you know, I remember coming in with a portfolio. Tom started looking through them and he's going, oh man, God, I hope we can be in this book someday. And I said, hey, I'm here to take your picture for Rolling Stone. Your first album is killing it. The show's going to be a sellout. You're already there, Tom.
All right, so we got Bob Dylan at Kezar Stadium in 1975, and this was part of a benefit concert called the Snack Benefit, which was for the public school program here in San Francisco. And I mean, you're literally 3 feet away from Bob Dylan on stage, right behind him. You know, nowadays, you know, when Bob Dylan doesn't even let anybody photograph him anymore. There are no photographers allowed to shoot Bob Dylan when he performs. Neil Young was at the show. Who else played at the Snack concert? And any insights into being that close to Dylan and kind of, you know, working with him or kind of being around? I mean, he was already rock royalty. I think Blood on the Tracks had just come out. I mean, he was still vibrant, and as he is today, and important. You know, thoughts on this?
You know what? I wasn't even going to go to that show. I lived 4 blocks away from Kezar, and Peter Frampton had been in town. I was hanging with Peter and his band, had shot them. Bob Mayo calls me that morning of the show, and he said, Z, are you going to go to the show today? And I said, which show are you talking about? He said, the Snack Benefit. And I go, I don't know. He says, but it's right by your house. And I said, he said, do you think you could get me in? And I said, you know, I know Kezar Stadium. I think I know a way to get you in. So he and Kristen and I walked over, and next to Kezar Stadium is Kezar Pavilion. Back when, in the old days when the 49ers played there, they dressed in Kezar Pavilion. You walked out and you walked into this tunnel that came out on the field. So I had no idea, but I walked down, that gate was open. I walked down the stairs. I walked them through the tunnel, and you walk into backstage. And I remember seeing Yorma was there. Everybody. I saw Wavy Gravy. I'm seeing all these people. I'm talking. At some point, somebody said, Bob Dylan's here. But, you know, in those days, you used to hear from time to time, you could be at a party at 8 o'clock at night, and somebody said, you know, John and Yoko's at so-and-so's party. And you'd leave there, Bob Dylan's here. And it would never happen. So when I heard Dylan was there, it was, yeah, okay, great. But I knew he probably wasn't there. Well, an hour into it, Bob Dylan's there. And now people are being led up on the stage, but very few people. And so I've got my camera. I'm with Christian. Bill goes, Michael, Christian, please. Ushers us on up stage. It's not just Dylan and his wife, Sarah, and Rich Danko. Neil Young's there. Marlon Brando's there. Joan Baez, Francis Coppola. You know, it's one of those moments where you're like, you walk into this room and it's like, oh shit. But of course, when you do that, you're acting like, it's pretty much like my living room. So I'm taking pictures. Dylan's on the piano. I'm right next to the piano. And Jay, I'm sure you've done this. You're shooting. I think this angle's a little better. I'm going to get in here. I could do it all. And you know, innately inside, you can push the envelope and push the envelope. You don't want to go too far, but you'll inevitably go a lot further than anybody would let you go today.
Yeah.
And that was the Snack Benefit. Again, that wouldn't have happened without Bob calling me, and it wouldn't have happened without Bill, you know, grabbing Kristen and I and putting us up on stage. Right. And I think he did that because he was very aware he wanted it documented. Right. One of my favorite pictures from that day is Bill, Marlon Brando, and Coppola talking. And it was right after Apocalypse Now. And you know, the thing about Bill was a performer. Bill always wanted to be an actor. Oh, and he was as big a performer as anybody he ever presented on his stage. And I think had he lived a few more years, you would have seen him in a number of movies. I mean, he was in Apocalypse. He was in the Bugsy movie.
Oh,
He would
yeah.
have been a few. There's a shot of Bill that looks exactly like Lucky Luciano's passport picture. It's like they were separated at birth.
Yeah. Okay, so just I want to clarify things for people. You bring up a woman named Kristen a lot. I just want to let everybody know that's Michael's wife, because she plays a role in a lot of these stories. So when you hear him talk about Kristen, you know that's his significant other. We have David.
She's the boss.
And yeah, so we have David Bowie, a live shot. But here let's go to this Peter Frampton photo taken backstage at the Day on the Green. You and Peter have a long time friendship. Peter actually wrote, I think, the afterword for your book over here, the Total Excess book. He invited you over to England. Talk to me about how you connected with Peter and your relationship with Peter, and how he sort of helped propel you to sort of the next level of your career in rock and roll. And because after we talk about Peter, we're going to talk about Clapton, who I know is another really important figure in your career in terms of rock and roll. So start with Frampton, and then we'll go to Clapton.
Well, yeah, again, I'm working on my book, and Peter was in Humble Pie. Humble Pie was staying at the Continental Lodge. I went there, I think, before their first gig. I first ran into Steve Marriott, and Steve was a short guy, but tall in stature in his mind. And he was strutting around and talking to me. And he says, "Oh, when you get a chance to, I'm glad you're, this is my band, and I've done this, I've done that." Then I went up to Peter's room. I remember Peter's then wife, Mary, who's still a good friend. She answered the door, had me come in. She was making tea. Peter sat on the bed. We started talking, turned on the tape recorder. At one point I said, "Well, how does it feel to be in somebody like Steve Marriott's band?" And Mary turned from where she was making tea and she goes, "Steve's band? This is Peter's band. Did he say that?" And I'm like, "What?" So Peter and I hit it off the way you'd go to school, and you just hit it off.
And then he invited you to England. And what year was that?
That was in 1971. And that was fast forward after Clapton and I'd gone back to, Eric Clapton with an interview we had done when Cream was breaking up. And by this time, Eric was with Delaney and Bonnie, and he had suggested he was looking through proof sheets we had done as he looked through the transcript of the interview we had done. And at one point he says, "I'm marking proof sheets." And he goes,
"Yeah, let's move over. I'm going to move forward to this first Clapton photo, the black and white one with the beard. Jonathan, move that forward. So go ahead and tell the Clapton story.
I'd gone to see Eric again, and he was, at that point in time, he was staying at the South Toledo Inn. He always loved that place because it had no televisions, no phone in the room. And so I remember going up, just knocking on the door. As always, Eric's gracious. He answers the door. We sit down. I remember I had a little square of black, I think, Afghani hash. So we smoked a little of that. We started having an esoteric conversation of the kind you have when you're both high. He started looking through the transcript of the old interview we had done. I started marking proof sheets, and at a point in time, he goes, "What you've got there?" And I said, "I've just got these proofs here." He says, "You mind if I have a look?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I handed him a couple of the proofs and a loop, and Eric's got the proofs like this, and it's got the loop, and he goes, "Oh, yes, quite good." I said, "Actually, Eric, if you take and put the loop on the photo and your eye on the loop, you can see what they actually look like." So he starts looking and he goes, "Oh, fucking hell." He says, "These are fucking great." He says, "Can we use these?" And I said, "For what?" He says, "Look, albums, songbooks." He says, "Look, man, we'll pay you." And I said, "Yeah, cool." He said, "Look, the writing's all right, but you should be like doing this for a gig." And at that point in time, I was still trying to figure out what I was going to do. I remember after the debacle at law school, my dad said, "Yeah, now what are you going to do, big shot?" And I'd go, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll know when I see it. which that's not what he wanted to hear. And it's suddenly like, wow, I'll be a photographer. I've always taken pictures. And that was it. A couple of weeks later, Peter comes to town and we're talking in the hotel or backstage somewhere. And I mentioned the thing with Eric and he goes, well, you've got to come to London. And I said, yeah, well, and at this point in time, I'm teaching in the hood until I figured out what I was going to do in real life. And I said, yeah, I'd love to come to London, but I don't have the money. There's no place to stay. And he says, well, you can stay in my place. I've got a place in St. John's Wood. So I'm on the road a lot. He says, Mary's modeling, but you're welcome to come and stay with us. So I end up going to London. I spent half of the time staying with our friend Terry Cook and his wife. He was a writer for the London Sunday Times, and then staying at Peter and Mary's. And, it was great because Mary was modeling. She's an international model. And I was going a lot of places with her. We'd go to antique stores. We went to some parties. Her friends were, for lack of a better word, London, not just rock royalty, but
Patty Boyd, right? Patty Boyd and Twiggy and
Twiggy was one of her best friends, and she and Patty. But their circle of friends were all people that were in that scene at the time. The Small Faces, and a lot of musicians. George and Peter were tight. Peter was doing a lot of session work, at Apple, which was a new label at the time. So I met people I never would have met in 1,000 years. And I, again, like so many things in life, I was at the right place at the right time. And, we continued every time he came over. We'd get together as friends first, but then I'm taking pictures. His career was really starting to take off. And I did my first big album cover was Frampton, that the shot of Peter he's got Stevie Marriott on his t-shirt on the cover. And it just sort of exploded from there. And I mean, to this day, we're in touch all the time.
How long did you stay in London for?
A month and a half.
Nice. So one more Clapton photo that I really love in this little sequence here is the one where his t-shirt says "No snow, no show." Like, can you even imagine like any band like being so overtly like, don't give me cocaine, then I'm not playing. Like, what a snapshot in time. Where was that shot from? Do you remember?
I think that was at the Concord Pavilion.
Late 70s.
Late 70s, and by that time things were starting to really change. It was starting to become a big industry. But yeah, cocaine was a hit of his. And at that point in time, cocaine was huge everywhere. That was late 70s, early 80s. And when I say everywhere, I don't mean just in the music scene. It was in the sports world. I was going to weddings sometimes, wedding receptions, here in town in Pacific Heights, where on a Sunday afternoon, half the people there are snorting and half the people that are there snorting are big time lawyers, people in city government, federal court judges, and the same people that probably the next day are sentencing, poor people to prison. So it was endemic in the whole society. People later would say, you did drugs? And I'd look at them and go, you didn't? Where the fuck were you?
All right, let's move on to Lynyrd Skynyrd. Tell me, I'm pretty sure you saw them opening for, I think it was The Who, was it, the first time? And you only caught a few songs and then they came back. Talk about your relationship with them, how you became friends with them. Tell me a little bit about the plane crash and the phone call you got from, I think it was Billy Powell.
Artemis.
Is that the drummer?
The drummer.
Right. And
Artemis was actually my best friend in the band. And I met them in November of 1973, where they were opening up for The Who. And Peter Rudge was their, I'm not sure if Peter was their road manager. I know he was road managing The Who, but he was also, I think, Lynyrd Skynyrd's manager. And so I'm backstage doing photographs of The Who. my friend Jack, who I had known since late high school, he was a band manager and a Christian coke dealer, as he referred to himself. He had just gotten back from Colombia. He was with me. He disappeared. Well, he was hanging out in Lynyrd Skynyrd's dressing room. And then they came on stage, they were playing. So he came back, knocked on the Who's dressing room and said, "Hey, you've got to come with me and hear these guys." And I said, "Jack, I'm kind of doing this right now." And he goes, no, you've got to hear this band. They're incredible, man. Do yourself a favor. So I went up on the side of the stage and watched for a couple numbers. And you know what? They were incredible. They were, I thought, better than the Allman Brothers at that point in time. And I'd never heard them before. So I remember we were staying at the St. Francis Hotel, the Who was. And before we jumped in the limos to go back there, I met Billy Powell, I met Artemis, and I met Leon Wilkerson, who Jack had befriended. And the next thing I knew, the next time they came to town, they called. They were Southerners. They were good old boys. I started shooting them and started partying with them, which was crazy. That was like
the group shot here that we have, this group portrait. What was that shot for?
That was for them. And I remember George Osaki actually came up from LA from the label and wanted me to do this shot. So I called Herbie Green, and we used Herbie's studio at the time and shot them there. And that was December 30th, 1976. They were playing the following night at the Oakland Coliseum. And they said, "You're shooting the show, right?" And I said, "I can't. I'm shooting Boz Scaggs at the Paramount for Rolling Stone." And it was like, fuck. But, you know, that was a money gig. So I remember shooting Boz Scaggs. Jim was there. Then we left right after Boz Scaggs finished his thing, and Skynyrd was done at Oakland. So we met them at the Edgewater Hyatt. And I remember we had dropped acid, and they were in the process of tearing up their rooms. And we were having a great old time. And about 2:30, someone hit the fire alarms, and we were all pretty fucked up. And they had been busted a couple times anyway. And I thought, I told Kristen, I said, "We've got to get out of here." I remember we went down the back stairs at the Edgewater, jumped in the car, and it's now about 3:30 in the morning, and thought we were okay. And we were on acid. And I remember getting in the car and I thought, this is like, we're in a fucking spaceship. And I think we drove back to San Francisco, probably going 20 miles an hour the whole way. Just.
So Skynyrd obviously has this fateful moment on an airplane. Tell me about that story with Artemis and the phone call and all that. So tell me.
Well, I remember I wanted to be on that tour, and initially Mary Beth Medley says, I think you're going to be able to shoot the tour, and we're going to get back to you. Then she called and said, "You know what? They've had to cut a number of people. You can't come," which was, it turned out to be a godsend. But at the time I was really pissed off because I was right in the middle of football, and I had told the 49ers I might have to leave to go on this rock and roll tour. Their plane crashes. We get a call from Artemis the next afternoon. Artemis had dropped acid in the hospital the day after the plane crash. He talked to us on the phone. I remember I'm on the phone in our bedroom. Kristen's on the extension in the other room. He talked nonstop for over an hour. And I mean, when I say he nonstop, we didn't say a word. He went through the 10 minutes before the plane crashed, took us all the way through the plane crash. I remember he said that, they had to wake Ronnie up, and Ronnie was really pissed off. It's going, "That motherfucker Rudge, he's going to fucking hear about this." And he said it was twilight. And he said, then they got lower and lower. And then all of a sudden, you could see the trees coming. And then he said it sounded like 1,000 baseball bats hitting against the plane. He said the next thing he knew, he woke up, he had this incredible pain in his leg. He could smell like swamp water. And he said, I remember Cassie Yates, who was behind me, or not Cassie Yates,
Gaines.
yeah, Kathy Gaines walking by me to the front because her brother was across the aisle in the first row.
So she was the singer and he was the guitar player. She was the singer in the band. He was the guitar player. So she walked past him to the front.
She walked past him to go up to her brother. And then he said he came in the door. Somebody had opened the door and he jumped down and he was in about maybe thigh deep water, swamp water, and got to walking and his leg was killing him. And he said, by now it's nightfall. There's some fireflies, you hear crickets. And he said they came to a cabin and he yelled and he said some old man came out of the cabin with a shotgun and said, get away from here, you motherfuckers. And he said, no, our planes crashed. And, you know, then they're in the hospital. And he said, Z, he said, they just told me there's no way I could have seen Cassie because they found her dead strapped to her seat a few rows behind me. I was like, oh.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Rolling Stones. This is one of my favorite Michael Zagaris stories. You know, Michael was dying to shoot that 72 Stones tour. And, you know, one of the most legendary debauchery type places, tours ever. Robert Frank was on there, the legendary photographer. He was making a film, which ultimately came out called Cocksucker Blues, which is the raunchiest, craziest tour film you'll ever see. If you can even find it on YouTube or anywhere else. I believe he's only allowed to show it, once a year at a film festival or something like that. Robert Frank is dead now, of course.
I've got a copy.
Yeah.
Hey,
so tell me what you did to get on that tour to go shoot the Stones in 72 and how that all went down.
Well, this was early in my career. And I thought at this point in time, I could pretty much shoot anybody I wanted just by calling up and saying, you know, I'm Michael Zagaris, I'm working for Rolling Stone, or I'm working for Cream Magazine. And I called the Stones, I think 3 or 4 months ahead of time. And I talked to somebody in their publicity office. And they said, no, you know, we'll take your name down. Who are you shooting for? And I said, I'd like to shoot for you guys. And they said, yeah, well, I think we have a photographer, but we'll get back to you. They never got back to me. I called 2 or 3 more times. And finally, I was connected with Joe Bergman, who was at that point in time, I think, Mick's personal secretary. And same thing, Joe, she said, you know, we've got a tour photographer. We're not going to be hiring anybody else. But, you know, maybe we'll see you on the tour. So I thought, God, what am I going to do? And at that point in time, I learned more about photography by reading French Photo, Italian Vogue, British Vogue, French Vogue. I mean, seeing the pictures. And I'm going through British Vogue and I see photo editor Leo Lerman, and it just light went off. So I waited and I called Joe Bergman back. Although this time I called Joe Bergman as Leo Lerman. And it was like, hello, Joe, this is Leo Lerman here, you know, photo editor for British Vogue. And we've got this great new photographer, Michael Zagaris, and we'd like to send him on assignment to shoot the lads. We're going to run like 4 or 5 pages, and we'd like you to, you know, give him pretty much whatever he needs. And she said, Leo, I'm sorry, you know, we've got a tour photographer right now, Ethan Russell. We'd be glad to make any of Ethan's shots available to you. But yeah, we're full up. And he goes, it's a pity. That's all right, love. Then maybe the next time they tour, we can do this. And she goes, well, wait a minute. He said, oh, we can't take handouts, can we? And she says, well, look, what's this guy's name again? He says, Michael Zagaris. He's quite accomplished. He's very good. And so she said, look, you get him up to Vancouver. He can shoot a few shows. We'll put him on with us, but only a few shows. So, right. And so I get all the information. I go up to Vancouver. I can't shoot the show at Vancouver.
Did they ever tell you why? Why you couldn't shoot?
No, you can't shoot right now. And at that point, I didn't want to like fuck things up. But so I get on the plane, get to San Francisco. Now I'm home. They're doing 4 shows in San Francisco, 2 each day with a day in between at Winterland. So I shoot those shows. see Ethan. Ethan doesn't talk to anybody. Jim's there. Jim's going in and out. He's doing his thing. We go down to Los Angeles. I meet Robert Frank, and Robert talks to hardly anybody, but his sound guy was great. And we hit it off immediately. And his sound guy was tight with Freddie Sessler and Keith, I remember. And I got stuff there that some of the best live shots I've ever gotten. I had, total access around the stage, and it was great. It was 6 shows. Jim and I left at the same point in time. Jim ended up getting the cover of Life magazine from the LA show. And I ended up shooting them 4 more times, little bits and pieces of tours. The 75 tour, that was the tour Annie was on.
That's the color shot that we have here. I don't know if Jonathan's shown this one yet. If you want to switch over that color shot. Let me ask something though. You're on the plane with the Stones. Are you doing drugs with them? Are you and Keith doing dope, smoking weed, smoking hash?
We're smoking weed. And I remember Freddie Sessler had a saddlebag, and in the front of the pouch, he had a little plastic baggie that had about probably 3 ounces of blow. And in the back of the saddlebag, he had China, because you don't want to go up if you can't come down. and also it was all pretty open. In Robert's, remember in Cocksucker Blues where there's a shot he's got backstage of Mick and Ahmet talking, and then kind of in the background Keith is like nodded out in the lap of this girl, and at one point Ahmet says to Mick, he goes, is Keith all right? And Mick goes, oh, right, yeah, he's a bit tired.
I mean, when you were on the plane, there's that legendary scene in Cocksucker Blues where the crew members have that girl. I mean, weren't there like a lot of underage, groupie girls on the Stones plane, and some pretty sketchy shit going on?
Later on, and I'm sure from city to city, it varied. The scene you're talking about, I think that happened in Ohio, where the girl who was shooting for her high school magazine or doing a story, that was her. There were 2 girls that became friends of mine later, that Lawrence, who was Keith's doctor, personal doctor.
The doctor.
Yeah. Well, no, he was a legit doctor. He was the doctor you wanted to have next to you. I remember I was like kind of falling out, and he gave me a B12 shot. And God, it stung like a motherfucker. But then you were like, okay, what are we gonna do now? But he had all kind. And I remember I said, do you have anything? I'm having a hard time sleeping. Do you have anything that'll, can give me energy? And he says, well, I've got B12. And I said, what about coming down from the B12? And he says, well, what would you like? I said, I don't know. I said, I'm not really into downers, but like Quaalude. And he goes, Quaalude. He says, we have mandrakes. It's like a double Quaalude. He said, you take one of these and have a bit of hash, and it's like a velvet hammer.
So there you go, the Rolling Stones, Michael Zagaris. All right, let's see. A couple shots in here. We have a proof sheet that we showed. Detail shot of some of your favorite shots here. That color shot of Mick in that white jumpsuit with the red sash. Just such great stuff, and so evocative of that 72 and 75 period. Just legendary Rolling Stones stuff. Let's look at this sequence. There's 4 photos of Lou Reed in San Francisco airport, followed by a shot of him up on stage. So let's look at these 4 photos. He's looking at the San Francisco Chronicle in a newspaper dispenser bin, tearing these newspapers up. What's going on here? What was the shot for? What was your hang like with Lou? And then, of course, that last shot that we'll get to, which is Lou up on stage. We'll save that one for when you get to the story, where he's doing something that would blow most people's minds today if it happened on stage at a concert. Tell us about Lou and your time with him.
Well, I was shooting on assignment for Cream magazine. Charles Aringer, I remember, was the photo editor, and Lester Bangs was writing the story. He said, "It's all set up. You're going to be shooting." I'd loved Lou from the time I was in college and got the first Velvet Underground album, and I fell in love with Nico at that point in time too. And but this was a little different. We met him. The girl that was his publicist, I had actually taken out in high school. I hadn't seen or heard from or of her since then until I saw her that night. Ernie Thormelin, who was on the back of Lou's album, the guy that was like this, had taken Kristen to her senior ball. She hadn't seen him since that night. We both run into these people. They're with Lou. We shoot the show. When Lou ties off and is shooting up, and honestly, to this day,
Go to that shot. If you're not up there yet, Jonathan, put the shot up. So here's Lou Reed tying his arm with a mic stand and shooting heroin on stage at, where's this, at Winterland?
It's at Winterland. Now, you know, honestly, and people have asked me this over the years, was he really shooting up heroin? I said, you know, honestly, I don't know. I said, if he was simulating it, he did a hell of a good job. And, you know, that night, half the Cockettes were there. I remember Billy Bowers was in the front. He had these long, like elbow-length black leather gloves. And when Lou was tying off, Billy started beating the stage with a studded belt. And Lou's doing this, and Jerry Pompili is next to me, Bill's right-hand man. And I'm shooting, and I stopped, and I turned to Jerry and said, Jerry, permanent member of the Fillmore family, because anytime there was a group that Bill or Jerry really liked, they'd either introduce them, or as they went off, they'd say, once again, please, Mr. J. Blakesberg, permanent member of the Fillmore family. So I said that, and Pompili turned to me and he goes, Michael, these people are sick. They're sick. So fast forward, the next day, I developed the film, make proofs, go to the hotel. We're all going to the airport. I'm showing Lou the proof sheet, and he's going, wow, this is really beautiful. I said, well, hey, don't worry. I said, nobody's going to ever see these. These are, you know, just, I'm not going to give them to the magazine for your eyes only. He goes, no. He said, can you make me some prints of this? I said, I'd like to give them as gifts. I said, really? He said, yeah. And he said, he gave me the name of this guy that was doing a book on him. And he said, this guy's doing a book on me. Get a hold of him. I'm sure he'd like to use this. And I said, well, you know, I'm doing this thing for Cream. Can I include these? And he goes, oh, yeah. And I said, and I know Rolling Stone's going to be reviewing your album. Would you mind if I give this to Rolling Stone? He said, no, I'd love to. So then we end up SFO. He's taking the red eye, goes in the bathroom. He's got Rachel with him. Ernie's with him. God, I'm trying to think of the girl's name that I'd gone out with. She's with him. He was in there a long time. He comes out. He was pretty spaced. He goes to the magazine rack, and I'm shooting him at this time. And I remember he's looking, and there's a straight guy that was kind of standing off, like what? And I remember the headline of the Chronicle was "Skyjacker Kills Hostage." I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. I shot it. Then Lou was going through. He started taking the papers apart, sat down, and I'm shooting all of this. Then their flights announced, and they left. That was it.
Unbelievable.
That shot of him lighting the cigarette. This
one right here.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite shots.
Yeah, and iconic, yeah. Of course, and it's the cover of your book, as it should be. I mean, this, you know, total excess, baby. You just shot this guy shooting dope on the stage at Winterland the night before, and now you're in the airport with him, getting the shot. So,
well, in how many countries? I mean, in a lot of places, you're condemned to death for that. You go nowhere. But but we're living in Babylon, man. So
let's move on to the Who you had a great relationship with. And I've got a series of 3 different shows here. So the first 2 shots, we got one of Roger Daltrey, and these were shot in '73 at the Cow Palace in South San Francisco, Daly City. I believe this is the first time he photographed The Who. So we've got The Who in '73 with Daltrey, and then there's this great shot of Townsend midair, knees bent, and you look closely and there's a picture and you see the drummer, and the drummer does not look like Keith Moon, but Keith Moon is still alive, obviously. What is the story with this photo with Pete Townsend fucking rocking out and somebody else on drums besides Keith Moon?
Well, first of all, Keith Moon was alive, although at that point in time when I took that last shot, probably just barely, the Who had flown up from Los Angeles for the gig. That was their kickoff for the 1973 Fallout Shelter tour. Moon missed the plane. As I was told later, he had done some kind of what he probably thought was acid, but was some kind of animal tranquilizer with this girl. They took a later flight. When the flight landed, the girl was taken to the hospital. Moon comes to the gig. I remember he was very, very quiet, didn't say anything. And I'm getting all my stuff together. I'm loading film. I remember I was talking to Daltrey for a few minutes. Peter Rudge is their road manager at the time. We go on stage. I can't remember how many numbers into the show, but you know how when you're shooting, Jay, you're hearing the music, but it's not like you're listening to everything. Yeah. You're more intent on faces and moments and things like that. And they had stopped once and then started up again. And then all of a sudden they stopped and they left the stage. Well, I hadn't noticed because I wasn't focusing on Moon, but Moon was tripping out and was sick, and they left the stage. I leave the stage. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I remember I went back and I thought, you know what? I'm going to get I had left my camera bag in the room and I was going to get a few more rolls of color film. And I remember Bill Graham talking to Rudge pretty heatedly. We've got a lot of people out there. What's going to, and he's going, no, Bill, it's all right. We're going to continue. We're going to continue. And so as they're talking, I walk into the room. I remember Aunt Whistle was like against the wall, just kind of looking off. Moon was like in a fetal position under this card table that had all the food, and Townsend was talking to him. And I'm still trying to, I don't know what's going on, but I'm grabbing those remember the little metal canisters with film, putting them in my pockets. And Pete goes, Keith, you all right? And he was kind of like, And I remember he grabbed this sandwich. He says, here, man, have a corned beef sandwich. Straighten yourself out. And so I leave the room, still not knowing what's going to go on. Maybe 10 minutes pass. Now he comes out. So I go back and run up that ramp. I'm ready to go. Show starts again. Maybe 2 numbers into it, I see him. He'd like fallen like this and then fallen back, and they're grabbing him. And I'm thinking, in the middle of the show, you don't know what's going on. You're like, wow. And so Townsend goes over. He's talking to some people. Now he comes to the microphone and he says, look, our drummer's a bit ill tonight. We'd like to play for you. Is there a drummer in the house? So I'm serious. Is there a drummer in the house? Well, that night, Michael Shreve was in the house, Spencer Dryden. There were a number of real drummers. So this guy comes to the side, ends up coming on stage. They're getting ready to start. I don't recognize them, but that doesn't mean anything. They start playing that shot. That's the mystery drummer, who turned out to be a high school kid who was a junior in high school at the time. I think his name was Scott Halpin. He was from Carmel Valley or Monterey, had never played in a band in his life, but actually loved to go home, get stoned, put on his headphones, and he had a drum kit in his room. And he'd put on the Who or Cream, and he became these guys. And the story, I think Joe Sullivan wrote about it later. He went back to his high school that Monday and told his friends, I played with the Who, with the Cowpels. And they went, you're so full of shit. True story.
Legendary.
That's who that was.
All right. So the Who come back to San Francisco in 76, and they're playing at Winterland. It's March of 76. And we've got a shot here from your book of Pete doing his windmill. Right. And then there's this great shot, which I love this picture. I have a print of it here actually in my studio of the end of the show at Winterland, taken from the balcony behind the stage, and Pete's throwing the guitar up in the air. It's 10 feet above him. The crowd is cheering. Tell me the story behind that particular show. Again, you're working for the band. And, you get the shot of Townsend earlier. Obviously, there's a bunch of other shots that you shot. And then you stopped shooting for a while until this balcony shot. So tell me the story here.
Well, right before we went on, maybe 10 minutes before we went on, I'm on my knees in the dressing room. And they were like, I remember that day the band had 2 different dressing rooms. And so now I'm alone in this one, and I'm winding film into the 3-4 different cameras and making sure everything's all set. And all of a sudden Mooney walks in, standing above me, and he goes, I've got a surprise for you. And I said, what, for me? He says, yeah. And I said, it's a plastic bag, and it looked like it had beef jerky in it. I said, jerky? He says, jerky? Whoa. Opens it up, pulls out this like black withered thing. It's magic mushroom, isn't it? Tears it in half, eats half of it. I remember he had a big beer, rolls it down and hands it to me. And I said, he says, you fancy some? I said, hey, look, man, I've got to shoot. And he goes, right. And I've got to play me fucking drums. So I thought, took it. I remember bitter as shit, threw down the beer. Now we're walking like 2 minutes later, we're walking out of the thing, then down the little corridor and then up the stairs. And as we're going up the stairs, I grabbed the back of his shirt and I said, hey, what kind of trip is this going to be? And he goes, I don't know. And so then Kristen and I leave the stage and go around to the front. And at Winterland in those days, maybe 20 feet off the stage, they had, to the left and the right, they had these 2 little boxes that were kind of elevated for video. Well, we go to the far right and there's nobody there. So we shoot from there. It's better than the pit. You get a nice overview. So we're shooting 3/4 of the way through the show. I start all of a sudden feeling like kind of anxious, and now more anxious. My mouth is kind of dry. And I remember at one point, Kristen handed me a camera, and there's kind of like trails that came with it. And now I'm starting to really come on. And, if when you get to that point where you're like, oh shit, wait a minute, I want to get off on this floor here, no higher. So I told her, I said, you know what? And she goes, are you okay? I said, I think we should go to the side of the stage and shoot. So we went backstage, go up on the stage, we're on the side, but now I'm really starting to get up there. I remember seeing, the light show and the lights, and now I'm anxious and, you're kind of paranoid. And I said, I think we should go behind the stage overhead. And they had part of the balcony shut off. So we took these little stairs and went up there. And I don't know if we've been up there 2 minutes, 5 minutes, but I'm standing over in the first row, right behind Mooney's drum kit. And I'm tripping. And I'm like, wow, this is so incredible. And Kristen turned to me and she goes, are you shooting this? And I was like, oh, yeah. And at that point, I pulled my camera up and I took a few shots in color, and then I had the black and white. And at that point, Townsend had thrown the guitar up. And, it's one of those things, and I'm sure this has happened to you, Jay. You take the picture, but the next day when you really look at it, you were shooting this, but you didn't see this and this. Everybody in Winterland is up, and it's like you can see every face. And I remember shooting that, and right after that, Mooney stood up on his stool and like just crashed into his drum kit. Cymbals go down, landed on his back. Pete grabs one ankle, Entwistle the other. They drug him off. that was the story of my shot. And, you know, somebody said, how did you prepare and anticipate for that? And I said, you know what? Had it not been for Kristen, that shot would have never happened. I might still be standing there.
Right, staring at your camera saying, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be taking pictures. Yeah, I've been like that at times where I've been so high that I couldn't take pictures on acid. So I've tried. There was a Dead show in 1980, and John Belushi came out to sing with the Grateful Dead, and I'm tripping my brains out, and I'm standing on a chair, and I'm trying to take pictures, and the whole roll is out of focus and overexposed, but there's 2 or 3 frames that are in focus just enough that I actually got it, you know. So it was probably like that where you get lucky and
you know, the color shot in my book of Eric.
Yeah.
Okay, that was Derek and the Dominoes. And I
showed that earlier. Yeah.
I had scored some what I thought was acid on Telegraph Avenue the day of the show in Berkeley. And I remember that I took it, the guy says, hey, you know, just take a half or I can't be responsible. Well, Berkeley Community Theater, I shoot the show. I was Eric Clapton that night. And I could hardly wait to see. I think I shot 6 rolls. Out of the 6 rolls, Jay, 1 frame came out. But that was the frame. And I think later on, I thought, you know, this is like magic. This is kind of like what I saw.
All you need is one. All right, so let's go through one more round of the Who. So now we're at Day on the Green. For those of you guys don't know, Day on the Green were these big giant all-day extravaganzas that Bill Graham did at the Oakland Stadium, the big outdoor stadium. And they were legendary. He did them for decades. He did them with the Who and Zeppelin and Frampton and Aerosmith and Skynyrd and the Rolling Stones and U2. And, you know, Day on the Green was a thing for a long time. That was a Bill Graham thing. So in 76, October, he does Day on the Green with the Who and the Grateful Dead. And so this first shot here is Daltrey and Moon and Townsend getting ready to walk on stage. Daltrey's wearing that amazing Fillmore East long sleeve shirt. I actually saw a friend of mine wearing one of those on a stream the other night, the short sleeve version, Michelle Baker. Here's a great shot of Daltrey making this weird kind of face at you. And then we get to the shot of Owsley Stanley III talking to Daltrey and some other, and a woman. And for those of you guys who don't know, Owsley was the guy who made 6 million hits of LSD in the Haight-Ashbury in the 1960s. And so tell us about your little interaction here with Owsley talking to Daltrey and when he sees you taking a photograph of him. Because I know from my experience that if he ever saw you at a Dead show with a camera backstage, he would run in the other direction. He did not want photographs taken of him. So what happened with you?
Well, you know, that day, it was the Dead family and the Who's friends. And it was great. I mean, we were all intermingling and I'm shooting, documenting everything that's happening. And sometimes I'd be with Pete, sometimes I'd be with Roger. I remember Mooney showed up with these 2 girls and he had one of those tuxedo t-shirt things. So I'm shooting that. And I see Roger said something to somebody and they went around kind of the back of a trailer and it was Bear. You know, and Bear, for people that don't know, that was what everybody called, that knew Owsley, he was Bear. So they're shooting. I'm doing what you do or I do when this is a document. I'm starting to shoot it. Bear shits. What are you doing? You can't take pictures. And I went, Bear, relax, man. I'm with the Who. I'm with you guys. I'm not with the CIA. This is all family. You don't have to worry about it. It's cool.
Yeah. So like I said, you know, he would run away from me if he saw a camera backstage. But in 99, he was up at the Grateful Dead warehouse at a Phil Lesh and Friends rehearsal. And I had a whole photo studio set up because I was going to do a portrait of Phil with the band he was rehearsing with that he was going to go out on the road with. And Owsley walks by and goes, what's this? And I go, I'm going to do a portrait of Phil. And he goes, want to do a portrait of me? And I'm like, uh-huh. And I have my Hasselblad and studio lighting. And he sits down on the stool. The garage door is open so you could see the parking lot behind him. And I shot a roll of 12 shots in black and white and 6 shots in color. And he gets up and walks away. And I'm the only person to ever do a portrait of Owsley Stanley III, also known as Bear.
So if I see that sheet acid with that portrait, I'll know that that's yours.
Yes. Yes. All right, so then we got a great shot of Townsend rehearsing in a dressing room. He's got his back to you with this road case that says The Who, PT. And then we have this great shot of Garcia and Townsend shooting the shit backstage with a woman between them who was actually Deborah Coons, his last wife. Here's a picture of you taking that photo of Townsend and Garcia with Deborah. Phil Lesh is in the background. That's John McIntyre, the band's manager. This was taken by a photographer named Snooky Flowers, who was a photographer, but also the saxophone player for Janis Joplin's Cosmic Blues Band. And Snooky just died a few weeks ago. Then we get to that photo that you mentioned a minute ago, which is Keith Moon with the tuxedo shirt and the two groupie girls walking behind him. Now, I'm pretty sure that you took this photo right after they left the dressing room, which is the next shot. And you walked in, and here's Keith Moon's dressing room, and it's completely turned over. The couch is on its side. There's garbage everywhere. I mean, was he having rough sex with these girls? Was it like total partying and he's just like, tossing furniture around? Like, what the fuck was going on with Keith Moon and these girls that are these groupies that he probably just met that day or flew up from LA or whatever, like what's going on here?
Only Mooney knew. I mean, he used to like to destroy things. And that they got kicked out of a number of hotels for that very reason. I think, no rough sex. I think he just liked it. He was smashing up the room. Nice. I remember when they came out, Annie Leibovitz was in there. So it might have been for Annie, for her benefit.
Nice.
Do something crazy.
And
you know what's ironic too? That was the last time The Who performed in San Francisco with Mooney, because he died, I think a year and a half later.
Crazy. And then I threw in a proof sheet here, which has got a bunch of those casual portraits he did of Townsend outside, sitting on a case, as well as like the ones inside of him rehearsing. And then, of course, there's this great shot of them from behind the stage. You're on the stage from behind, looking out at the stadium, and Pete's doing that badass full-on leg split, and Daltrey's got his leg up in the air, and Entwistle's just being, the dude just standing there stoic. Just such an epic shot. And then, of course, the last shot here is Townsend standing in the doorway of his dressing room. Just such a great document. I mean, as a photographer, I look at this stuff and I'm just like, this is really a well-documented show. Pete hanging out with Garcia, Pete rehearsing in his dressing room, casual shots of them, with instruments hanging out. Pete had that Les Paul with the number 5 written on it, stuff from on stage, getting ready to go on stage. I mean, that's like, to me, that's what tells the story of a day in rock and roll, when there's all of this stuff, not going out and shooting 3 songs in a pit. And, it's funny because back then, as we know, access was different than it had become, like in the late 80s and the early 90s, when I was doing a lot of shooting for Rolling Stone and Bam Magazine and Musician and other magazines. A lot of artists looked at photographers like we were the enemy. Like there were bands that were just like, no, you can't shoot this. I remember I was on assignment for Rolling Stone magazine. I flew to Denver to shoot this show with this guy named Mike Watt, who was in a band called the Minutemen, a punk band. But that particular tour, his band was Mike Watt on bass, Dave Grohl on drums, Eddie Vedder on vocals and guitar, and they wouldn't let me shoot. Because they was just like, no, you can't shoot this. It's like, this is too pure. And it's funny because I'd forgotten about that. But about a month ago, I got an email from a photo editor at a magazine in England, at Mojo Magazine, saying, hey, did you shoot that tour where Eddie Vedder and Dave Grohl played with Mike Watt? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I was there in Denver when they did the show, but they wouldn't let me shoot. And Mike Watt let me do some portraits of him sitting in the van. But I mean, I was standing there watching Eddie Vedder load his own amps and guitars and gear and roll out of the back of a van, just a regular van that they were traveling in, and loading his stuff into the venue. And I was not allowed to take pictures. It just was killing me. So, good documentation is beginning to end. And nowadays, these artists that said, no, I bet you they would have loved to have seen these pictures 25 years later. People just weren't thinking about it. But let's move on to Led Zeppelin. So this first photo, so this is a legendary rock and roll story. It's your story, but it's also a Led Zeppelin story, and it's well known and well told. But we're going to hear it from you. But you're going to mention a couple of Peters in this story. And so we have Peter Grant, who we have pictured here, this big, very heavyweight guy. He's probably 300 pounds, I'm guessing. He was notorious for being a legendary draconian manager on all levels that you could possibly imagine. And then there's another guy that's part of the story named Peter Barsotti. And Peter was Bill Graham's right-hand man, one of his lieutenants, who was producing the concert for Bill. And so, we'll flip through these photos and you'll kind of tell the story. But, we got Peter Grant. We have this great color shot of Robert Plant wearing the Nurses Do It Better t-shirt, which is classic. Page holding up the guitar. Robert on the side of the stage, smoking the cigarette right before he goes on. Jimmy playing acoustic guitar. Of course, you got Jimmy playing the double neck, Gibson SG Stairway to Heaven, I'm sure is what's going on there. And then, of course, the black and white shot of Plant with the Nurses Do It Better. Those are, again, all from that, excuse me, all from that show. And these are all Led Zeppelin, July 77, Day on the Green. Tell us the story about what went down that day.
Boy, that cough, Jay, I haven't heard a cough like that since about a week before right? Lou Gehrig died. I hope you're going to come out of this okay. So that day, first of all, I was shooting for the band. I remember John Bindon, who was one of the people that was instrumental in what initially went down. We were talking at one point about Peter Grant. And I said, hey, what was Peter doing before this? He says, before this. He says, well, he was in Brixton prison, wasn't he? I said, what? I said, he was in Brixton prison. He says, so you have a problem with that? I said, no, that's totally cool. I said, what happened? What did he do? He says, well, it was manslaughter, wasn't it? And I said, manslaughter? He said, right, mate, manslaughter. That's what they give a bloke if he's like murdered somebody, but he's got bread and gets out of it. I was like, okay. And I knew Peter from the last time Led Zeppelin had come. I wasn't shooting for them or with them, but he was a very imposing person. He intimidated people, but he did right for his band. So I'm working for them. There was a huge brouhaha that went on backstage that somehow I missed. But because of what went down, and what I had heard went down was Jim Mazurkas, who was one of Bill Graham's stagehands, had taken a ball away from Peter Grant's son, who was, I think, 10 or 11 at the time. Backstage at A Day on the Green, they had a number of trailers. They had food courts. They had basketball nets so you could play basketball. And apparently Peter's son was throwing the basketball around, hitting people. Somebody complained. So I think Barsotti went to Mazurkas, and Jim basically said, hey, I'm going to take this ball. People are complaining. When the crowd thins out a bit, you can have it back. Apparently he went to his dad and said, hey, this guy took the ball. Who knows what he said? But now Led Zeppelin, Peter Grant is basically summoning Mazurkas to have a word with him about that. Apparently, Jim goes up into the trailer. As he walked into the trailer, John Bindon, the roadie, tripped him. He fell. Peter Grant sat on him as he fell, and Bindon and Bonham they started kicking his ass, beating his ass. He came running out of the trailer. His eyes were swollen shut. His nose was bleeding. So out of that, there's a chance there's not going to be a show. Bill was going to sue. Peter Grant basically said, if you're going to sue us, we're not playing. The only way we play is if you sign this paper, basically releasing us of, all liability. Bill's attorney at the time was William Koblenz, who was the head of the Board of Regents of University of California, very powerful man in legal circles and in political circles in the state. He tells Bill, sign sign the paper. You're signing it under duress. It will have no validity in any court of law. So Bill signs it. The next day, Kristen and I arrive with the band. As soon as I walk in, Peter Barsotti, who's also a friend of ours, grabs me and he goes, Michael, there's no way you're going to go on stage unless you have one of our passes. And I said, Peter, I've got this laminate. I'm shooting for the band. He said, yeah, you can't shoot on stage unless Peter Grant requests one of our stickers, our passes from us. And I said, hey, man, I know what's going on. Don't put me in the middle of this. I said, I've got a new baby. I said, I have nothing to do with this. He said, sorry, they're going to have to ask for a pass. So now I go to our Led Zeppelin's trailer. Peter's in conversation with somebody. I waited like 10 minutes and finally he goes, is there a problem? And I says, no, there's not really a problem, Peter. But I said, the Peter Barsotti, who's Bill Graham's right-hand man, said, I can't go on stage to shoot you guys unless you request one of their passes for me. He goes, what? And I said, yeah. I said, you know what? And he goes, you tell Peter Barsotti, you've got the only fucking pass you need, and it's Led Zeppelin. And you tell him, if any of their people lay a hand on you, we've got two blokes here who are packing and we'll fucking blow them away. And I said, hey, I can't really. He says, no, mate, straight away, go tell him. So now I'm thinking, oh, shit. So I go back into the production trailer and he said, what's going to happen? I said, you know what? He's really upset. He said, basically, I've got our laminate. That's all I need. And he said, well, you can't shoot. And I said, and he said, they've got two people, our security people. If anybody fucks with me, they're going to blow them away. And he goes, they're going to blow them away. They're going to blow us away. And I said, Peter, he's upset. It's a figure of speech, but you know. And he goes, blow us away. He says, hold on, I'll be right back. And now I'm thinking, oh, fuck. So now 5 minutes later, Bill appears. Goes, Michael, what did Peter Grant say? And I said, Bill, he's really fucking upset. But I said, no. I want you to tell me word for word what he said. I said, well, he said that I've got the only pass I need, Led Zeppelin laminate. They've got two people there that are their security people, and they're packing. And if any of your people lay a hand on me, they'll blow them away. But he says, what? They'll blow us away? I said, Bill, he's upset. It's a figure of speech. He says, they'll blow us away. He says, come with me. And now I'm thinking, fuck. Now I'm not going to shoot. I'll probably have to leave. So Bill walks me out to the front of the stage. And remember how the day on the green, the stage was like 30 feet tall and they had about a 15-foot, like kind of little moat separating the crowd from the front. Well, he's got 10, 12 guys. Some guys had white beaters. I remember a couple guys were bare chested. A couple guys had shorts. A couple of guys had their hands taped. A couple Samoan brothers. And he looks at them and grabs my laminate and holds it up and says, see this man? Remember his face. He's working for Led Zeppelin, but he's a friend of ours. He says, you can go now, Michael. I leave. That's the end of it. We do the show. After the show, we've got 4 limos. There are 4 or 5 Oakland PD, a couple Alameda County sheriffs, and about 3 highway patrol cars. Band goes to Oakland Airport. I can't remember there's a little thing adjunct to it, the Kaiser wing or something, where our plane is. They surround the plane, the police do. They take Peter Grant, John Binden, and our drummer. They take them to Alameda County, I think, sheriff's office, and they book them with assault. The band flies on to New Orleans, where they're supposed to play in 2 days at the Superdome there. The day after they arrive, Robert Plant gets the phone call that his son Carrick, who was 4 years old, beautiful child, kind of looked like the child on the label of the Swan Song, had contracted peritonitis and died. Led Zeppelin flies off to England. I think they played the Glastonbury Festival a few weeks later, a couple gigs, maybe in the north of England or Germany. And then Bonzo died. And so that show was the last time Led Zeppelin, as Led Zeppelin, ever played in America. And the irony here is the Who show was the last time the Who ever played in the States with Keith Moon as the drummer. The Sex Pistols, the last show they ever played as a band was at Winterland in San Francisco. And the Beatles' last show that they ever played as the Beatles was at Candlestick Park. So it's amazing how San Francisco and the Bay Area is kind of the confluence for these kind of events.
Amazing. Amazing. All right, we're going to flip through a couple of quick photos here and get into some sports soon. So we have Blondie. You were on assignment, I think, for Rolling Stone magazine for this one, I think you told me. We're going to we'll skip some long stories here because we're at about an hour and a half now. I also want to remind everybody, if you want to ask questions to Michael at the end here, I think you can do it on the Facebook page or the stream. There's a bunch of different places, wherever you're watching. We have somebody, a guy named Harrison, who's monitoring that. Put your questions in. He's keeping track of them, and we'll get to about 15 or 20 minutes of questions at the end of the interview with Michael. We have the legendary poet Jim Carroll. This is a photo you did in San Francisco. He ended up using one of your photos on the cover of his basketball diary book. Let's talk about that Sex Pistols show. So, we got 3 photos of the Sex Pistols here. We got this one that's sort of a wide group shot, close up of Johnny Rotten sort of trying to pretend he's picking his nose. And Sid Vicious, Johnny Rotten, yeah. And then Sid Vicious playing bass with the classic, padlock around his neck. Who was your assignment for? What was it like shooting this show that was, legendary punk show, the last time the Sex Pistols ever played together in San Francisco?
Rolling Stone called me and they basically assigned me to shoot them. And they said, the Sex Pistols. And I said, you're doing a story on the Sex Pistols? And they said, yeah. And I said, I just heard their album. They suck. And they said, well, no, they're really, they're a real happening band. Do you not want to shoot them? I said, no, I'll shoot them. And then I remember it was a very abbreviated tour. I had seen, I think it was on CBS, maybe a 10-second clip from the Atlanta show. And it was like, and then they played the show in Texas at that country Western bar where it was half punk, half country Western people. And some redneck threw a bottle of beer up on the stage and it broke and Sid picked it up. They were yelling, get off the stage, you fucking faggots. And Sid started slashing himself with the bottle and the rednecks got real quiet. Like, who are these guys? And so I go to the sound check at Winterland. It's in January 1978. It's cold. It's raining. I'm standing out in front of the thing. The bus pulls up. As they got off the bus, just as they were getting off the bus, remember Johnny got off first. He's got a white shirt and a vest. Then Stu, and then Sid. And Sid has got his jacket and he's got a Nazi armband around his knee. And side door opens and Bill is on the inside waiting. And as Malcolm McLaren walks in, Bill grabs Malcolm and goes, that armband, that's not a fashion statement. And I'm thinking, oh shit, because Bill's history. And
Holocaust survivor, basically.
Exactly. And he and his family walked across Europe and he lost some members of the family.
Oh, yeah.
So that being said, I get home and I said to Kristen, I said, look, you've got to come to the show with me tonight. And she goes, Sex Pistols? Are you kidding? I said, no. You've got to come. This is going to be, just trust me, this is going to be special. This is going to be different. We showed up in the lobby. The whole punk scene from LA had come up and they're mingling with the San Francisco punk scene. And you could feel the energy. It's just crackling. And then we go into the auditorium. There's no pit this time. When they came out, it was literally from the moment they came out. First, it was just dark and people were screaming and you hear crashing. And then they started playing. it was like being in a riot, and people were throwing bottles. People were throwing shoes up on the stage as they're playing. People like hacking up lungers, going, spitting. Remember, Johnny's yelling shit like, "Oh, thanks for the gifts." And Sid at one point said, "Throw $100 bills, you cocksuckers." And I remember at one point, Bill had a purple Minnesota Vikings satin jacket on, and the crowd was so crazy. I'm not a small guy. I was being lifted off my feet, and Kristen was being crushed. And I remember Bill reached down and grabbed Kristen and pulled her up onto the stage out of the crowd and looked down at me like, "How could you have her in that mob?" So they play the whole show like this. And that show, one of the greatest 2 or 3 I put it up there with seeing James Brown at the Howard Theater in 1965, early Rolling Stone shows. It was that good. As they're walking off the stage, still people are throwing shit up, and Johnny goes, "Don't you all feel cheated?" Threw down the microphone, goes backstage. Backstage was it was also more of the same. I remember Sonny Jim, the Stray Cats. He's there with Britt Eklund. Sid had disappeared. All of these different people are all around. All of a sudden, Sid comes out of a side room with this girl named Ivy. You could tell he had just shot up. His eyes were watering. His nose is running. And he sees Britt, and he kind of like pulls up and goes, just throws up. And she like jumps back, almost hits her ankles. She lets out a scream. This guy in a black leather jacket that had come up from LA next to me goes, "Oh, that's pretty punk, man." and that was it. And that infamy, they were done after that. And again, that was the last Sex Pistols show.
Another legendary punk band that you worked with would be the Clash. We have 3 photos here. This looks like a day on the green where they're walking from the dressing room. There's a color shot of them standing on stage before they go on in the stadium. And then, of course, there's the live shot of them with Joe in the middle. I also know that you had a lifelong friendship with Joe Strummer until he died, from when you first shot it. Just tell me briefly, because I want to move into some sports here. Well, first, after we do this, the Clash, I want you to talk about your mug shot here that we have, and then we'll get into some sports because there's such legendary stuff there. But real quick, just give me a quick rundown on the Clash and your connection to them and Joe Strummer.
I mean, I first, before I even met Joe, their first gig they ever played here was at Berkeley Community Theater. It was the year after the Sex Pistols show, I think January '79. And again, it was one of those monumental shows. I remember walking down the aisle to get, because we were shooting from right in the front, and Pearl Harbor and the Explosions were playing I Can Feel the Fire. And it was fucking legendary. It was better than the Ronnie Wood cover on his album. And I thought, this is going to be a great night. And the first 4 rows were VIPs in there. Halfway through the first number, the crowd just overwhelmed everybody in that section, broke chairs. I mean, it was like a mini riot. I thought, this is great. Fast forward to New York, summer of 1981. I'm staying again, this time with my same friend, Jack Miller, who, the Christian Coke dealer, who actually had a suite on the 17th floor of, God, I'm trying to think of
Gramercy Park.
Gramercy Park Hotel. The Clash are staying there. And the Gramercy Park was great because the bellmen there, they were guys in their 80s that looked like they were, decadent jockey junkies. And when they take your shit to your room, as you went in, they say, "Hey boys, what do you need? Let me know anything. We can get you drugs. We can get you girls. Here's my card. Just don't be afraid to ask." That was the first time I actually met Joe down at the hotel bar. And I think Bob Gruen was with him. And, we just hit it off. And the great thing is, not just a musician, Joe was into politics. And the Clash were who they played and sounded like, as were most of their audience. I mean, if I had to come back and could do one tour in one moment in time, it would be with them, because they were not only of their time, they were ahead of their time. The Clash should be the perfect band for all the shit that's going down right now.
Right on. So let's go to this mugshot of you from the San Francisco Police Department on March 10th, 1978. I understand this was a marijuana bust. Tell me the story behind this, because we talked about this yesterday, and I had never heard the story, but it's just such a legendary fucking San Francisco rock and roll story that I feel like the fans and listeners out there will enjoy this one of a classic moment in late 70s San Francisco history.
Well, the late Dennis Perrone used to have what was called the marijuana supermarket, or the Big Top supermarket. And he lived on Castro between 18th and 19th. He even had business cards and stationery. I don't want to say everybody in the city came there, but I had taken members of the San Francisco some of the Giant baseball team guys there, where I'd run into members of the city hall, attorneys, musicians. I mean, it was kind of a who's who. I remember bringing my friend Terry Cook, who worked for the London Sunday Times, and he was really paranoid. He says, "Oh, this is like open. We could get like busted." And I said, "Dude, don't worry. This is San Francisco. I'm sure, everybody's here. The fix is on." And I ended up doing a High Times cover and a lengthy story. And Dennis loved it. And he said, "Hey, Michael, this is great." And Dennis had actually come out to San Francisco. He was an ex-Air Force guy, had come out with Harvey Milk, who was a friend of his. And he had introduced me to Harvey when Harvey had his camera store. And he said, "Look, I need some of these pictures." He said, "Can I buy some?" I said, "No, you can't buy any. Let's do a trade." He said, "That's even better." So a couple of weeks go by. I call Dennis. Somebody answers the phone. I said, "Hey, it's Z." I said, "Is now a good time to come over to do that trade?" And the person goes, "Dennis was in a meeting. Come on over." And I tell Kristen I said, "Hey, I'm going to go to Dennis's." And she says, "We're just about ready to have dinner." I said, "I'll be back." And it's just right over the hill. I'll be back in like 20 minutes. So I get there. There's a car up on the sidewalk, almost crashed into the side of the house. People kind of around looking. But there's a parking place right in the front, which there never was. I'm thinking, this is great. I park. Front door is even open. It's even better. And moral of the story here is, don't shop if you're hungry. I got about halfway up the stairs. Something didn't feel right. And I look up and I see kind of a glit coming off this guy who's wearing a Pendleton's chest, and it suddenly hits me. This is a fucking bust. So I go, "Hey, man," I said, "you look like you're kind of busy." And I started backing down. Somebody puts a gun in my back and said, "Hey, man, join the party. Get up there." So now I get to the top of the stairs and I see Eric Christensen, Channel 7's there, Channel 5. Eric goes, "Z-Man, what's going on?" I said, "Man, I don't know." I said, I'm a journalist." I said, I was here to cover a story. And one of the cops said, "You know this guy?" He said, "Yeah, Z, he shoots for the 49ers, the Giants." And I'm thinking, "Oh, fuck." And the police said, "You got some ID?" And now I'm haughty. Like, fuck yeah. Take out my driver's license, hand it to him. And now I'm talking to people like, "Say, how long you guys been here? Man, what's going on?" Cop comes back and he said, "Michael Zagaris, 861 Ashbury." I said, "That's me." Said, "You have $950 of outstanding parking tickets." And actually, I did know, because they had come to my house at 2 a.m. about a month before, knocked on the door, and I come to the door, and immediately I opened the door and they said, "Michael Zagaris?" I said, "No, fuck, no." They said, "You're not Michael Zagaris?" I said, "No." I said, "He roomed here," but I said, "He's been gone for a couple of months." And they said, "Do you know where he is?" I said, "I wish I did. He fucking owes me for back rent." They went, "Well, if he contacts you, would you have him come to Park Station? We need to talk to him." I said, "Definitely." Now, a smart man the next day would have gone and tried to work something out, but I was broke. I said, "Fuck it." So when he said, do you know? I said, "No, really? $950? And he said, "Yeah. Do you have the money?" I said, "Well, not on me." I said, "How long are you guys going to be here?" No. Now I'm arrested. They handcuff me. They take me in the back room where there were about 20 people. I heard a couple girls were crying. There's one old guy with long gray hair down to about mid-thigh, and he's telling the cops, you know, hey, motherfuckers, I'm going to be out while you're still filling out your reports. Boomer, one of Dennis's lieutenants, goes, see, man, they got you too? And so now the police are like, fuck. They shoved me over there. So 20 minutes later, we're going, it's like a movie. We're going downstairs. We're outside. They've got all these cameras with things, and you know, you're like handcuffed, trying to do this. We get in the paddy wagon. Now they start driving off. Dennis pulls up out a bomber, lights it up, starts passing it around. And I'm thinking, there are about 20 that's in there. I'm thinking, what are you doing, dude? And now the paddy wagon pulls over. One of the cops is pounding on the back. He goes, knock that shit off. We know what you're doing. And Dennis goes, what? Or you'll bust us? And so now we get to City Hall, and I'm going, hey man, I need to make a phone call later. And now you know how it takes like half an hour, 45 minutes, you're getting booked. The hippie with the long hair, and I'm handcuffed to him. They come to him. The booking sergeant, who's this big brother, goes, you know, name. The guy gives his name. What occupation? He goes, dope dealer. He goes, now, come on, man. I'm going to give you another chance. What's your occupation? He said, you heard me the first time, Sambo. I'm a fucking dope dealer. And now the guy gets up, you know, he's whipping out his nightstick. I'm handcuffed to the guy. So now I'm literally falling off the chair thinking, if he starts hitting him, I don't want to get it on the rebound. They undo the handcuffs. They took him into another room. And now it's me. Say, Michael Zagaris, what's your occupation? And I said, you know, I'm a journalist. I shouldn't even be here. And he goes, yeah. And I said, but hold on. So now I whip out my wallet. I'd always carried those, remember those in Monopoly, the chance and community chest?
Get out of jail.
Yellow
card.
Community chest, get out of jail free card. So I pull that out. I look back at my friends, and I handed him the card, and he looks at it, looks at me, looks back at the card, and goes, book this motherfucker. And so now I'm reaching for the card. He says, and you ain't getting this back. And so now I said, what about my phone call? He said, you'll get a phone call. And so now they're taking us up. And I remember we had to go up the elevator, you know, we're handcuffed. And now they lead us down under the handcuffs. And they put Dennis and I in this big, it had like a diving bell door, opened it up, shoved us in. And they're shutting, and I'm going, what about my phone call? And now, and I'm like hitting on the door, and all of a sudden, this old black man comes up behind me and goes, hey, boy, what's wrong with you? I said, hey, man. I said, I've been here almost an hour. I said, I haven't got a fucking phone call. He goes, oh, boy, I've been here since Tuesday. I ain't got no call. And all of a sudden, this other bigger brother comes up to me and he goes, what you motherfuckers in here for? And I said, you know, I'm a journalist. I shouldn't even be in here. And Dennis, who's next to me, goes, we're in here for fucking dope, man. Now the guy turns to Dennis. He says, gets right up to his face. He goes, well, you got any dope? And Dennis goes, fucking A. Whips out 3 bombers. So we were like the toast of the jail. And that's my
unbelievable.
That's the story of my bust.
All right, let's get into some sports here because we're running out of time. So Michael, you know, he's been talking about the 49ers. He first started shooting for the 49ers in 1973, and Michael has shot 46 Super Bowls. He started working as the team photographer for the Oakland A's. He's got the cap on there in 1981. So he's got, you know, 40 years just about working for the A's, and he's shot 12 World Series. He's got Super Bowl rings and World Series rings. Like people wear brass knuckles. Michael's got those rings that he wears when he's trying to impress us little young photographers out on the rock and roll scene.
I never wear those. No.
I'm kidding. So anyway, so just real quick, I'm going to kind of whip through some of these photos here. You know, we got Jose Canseco, who was a legendary Oakland A, Willie Mays on the ball field. There's this black and white shot of, I believe he's the commissioner of baseball, followed by this color shot of a bunch of Oakland A's staring out into the crowd. Now, what is going on here is This is the World Series in 1989. 89
Yeah.
World Series. And what had just happened was the Loma Prieta earthquake had just happened, and the whole stadium was shaking. And this was the famous World Series between the A's and the Giants. It was a Bay Bridge World Series. Game 3, I believe this was.
Yep.
And they had to stop the World Series because a major earthquake hit California and knocked down freeways and killed people and burned homes. And so there's that shot. And then, of course, there's this last shot of Jose Canseco, flexing his muscle. So let's talk about the A's for a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk about the 49ers, and then we'll wrap this up with some questions. So, tell me a little bit about your time with the A's, any great stories, World Series, what was it like?
I could talk for 10 hours on the A's, but those shots you were showing, that was right before the series happened. And Jose and I had just left the locker room, which an old Candlestick was down the right field line. And when we walked out, we had won the first 2 games. We were up 2-0. We had a great ball club. And as we walked out of the door, a lot of the Giant fans started yelling at Jose and razzing him. And Jose stopped and goes like this. And I went to take the picture. And as he did that, it sounded like right behind me over the upper deck in right field, it sounded like 3 jets were literally almost coming over the top of it was like, what that sound was, that was the sound of the metal plates, like 7 or 8 miles below the earth moving. And everything started just moving. Although, you know what, in retrospect, you lose all track of time, place, space. I'm not sure how long it was, 10 seconds or 30 seconds. It's timeless. And I remember looking past Jose, and I could see the upper deck, between home and third, where my son and his friend and Kristen and her sister were sitting, was going up and down like this. And the scoreboard, the big scoreboard was like this. And then it stopped. And Jose had fallen, kind of fallen back against me. And he said, what the hell is that? He says, I've got a migraine. I said, hey, it's just an earthquake. When the earthquake stopped, there was a big roar from the fans. Now Jose and I continue up or down the right field line, and we run into Joe Morgan, Willie Mays, and 2 writers from New York who were standing about where the first base coaching box would be. And Willie was just babbling. Kept saying, I told you there's something wrong. I'm getting out of here. I don't like this. And he walked away, and Joe Morgan turned to me and said, hey, the last half hour, Willie's been talking about something's not right. He doesn't feel right. Something's happening. That day it was unseasonably warm. I think it was around 82 degrees. It was Indian summer, totally still. And Willie had sensed something, unknowns, but
we used to call it earthquake weather. Remember, we'd be like, oh, it's earthquake weather, And
it was. And then we got up to the shot of the commissioner. That was Fay Vincent at the time. 2 days before game 2, in the middle of the game, a guinea hen jumped onto the field from right field. And so Fay Vincent looks at me and said, hey, you guys had that guinea hen in right field the other night. I think this might top it. And that was kind of the genesis of that whole thing. And, we thought at that point in time, okay, this is out of the way. Now the games are going to start. But, the wives had just arrived. They had actually come on a bus from the Oakland Coliseum and gone through the elevated on the Nimitz freeway. Had they been 20 minutes later, when that earthquake hit, the freeway collapsed, they were all dead.
Yeah.
And
no,
so
that was where most of the fatalities were, was when that freeway collapsed.
That's
all
right.
Let's jump into some 49ers. So we got this shot of Montana with the Fu Manchu mustache, early Montana. Then we got this black and white shot of all the referees with their arms up because it was the touchdown. And this was what is famously known in football history as the catch. This was one of the most famous plays in Super Bowl history. Right? This was Super Bowl, right, Michael?
No, this was the championship
okay,
that led up to the Super Bowl.
So tell us the story about the catch, what it was, and what the score was, and how much time was left, and what happened, and the Joe Montana Dwight Clark connection here.
Well, Joe and Dwight were best friends from the time they both got into training camp, and Dwight never thought he'd even make the team. And fast forward a year later, 1981, the 49ers were a Cinderella team. Nobody thought they'd even be in contention. They ended up in the championship game playing Dallas, who they had beaten in October. I think it was 45-10. This game went back and forth, back and forth. We had a long drive. We were on third down. We had moved down the field on Dallas on a number of plays, but mainly sweeps and screen passes. So now it's third down. I think 3rd and 8, 50 some seconds to go. I position myself, if you're standing in front of the goalpost, I'm on the right-hand side, because I thought this is going to be the 18 Bob, which was a sweep to Linville Elliott. Joe rolls out. He hits Dwight for the touchdown. I've got the wide angle, kind of the alternative shot. As Dwight's coming down, I mean, the great thing in retrospect, you can see everybody in the stands, their arms are raised. There's Jimmy Hill of the network on the sidelines. My good friend Peter Miller, who was shooting for Sports Illustrated, struggling to get his camera up. After the catch, and I shot that, I ran, I got a couple jubilation shots, and then run with Dwight to the bench, shooting players jumping at each other. And at a certain point, Dwight grabs me and he hugs me. And as he's hugging me, I yell into the ear hole of his helmet. I said, "Thanks for fucking me up, man. I was waiting for the 18 Bob." Dwight kind of like, "What?" And ended up, the game wasn't over. I got another shot of Dwight, Joe, and Mike Schumann huddled together with Joe saying, "Hey, if somehow they score, we get the ball back, here's what we're going to do." Dallas got the ball. They threw a bomb to Drew Pearson. Eric Wright saved the game, the Super Bowl, everything, by grabbing him and pulling him down. And that, we went on to the Super Bowl.
Amazing. So we got a great shot of Joe Montana with the equipment manager backstage, sitting in the locker room with Dwight Clark and another player between them. There's a legendary shot of Bill Walsh, who was of course the legendary coach of the 49ers, with Montana squatted down on the field. I think that's such an important photo, because the combination of Bill Walsh and Joe Montana was such an important part of 49er history. I got to do a portrait of Bill Walsh after he had retired for a magazine. Joe Montana sitting in his little cubicle next to his Jerry Rice's cubicle in the locker room. You can see Rice's uniform there. Dwight and Joe talking on the bench. You know, again, this is like, to me, this is documenting rock and roll. The shot of the two of them on the bench here talking. Talk to me a little bit about the difference, and then this will be our last thing before we go into questions. A little bit about access in sports versus access in rock and roll, because I think that the shots like that you are getting of the 49ers, because you're the team photographer, you know, from what I understand, I've never even shot professional football. I don't think unless you're the team photographer, you're not allowed in a certain area of where the bench is. Is that correct? You can only be on one side or the other side of the bench. Is that right?
Right. So, well, now I can't even be on the bench because of after, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, the New England Patriots were supposedly shot across the field. You know, and again, this is the largesse of corporate America, corporate football. I mean, you can't do shit anymore. You know, because you could be infringing on this, or you could be cheating, or the networks have paid, you know, 40 million and they want this shot. That shot of Bill or of Joe and Dwight talking, actually what had happened there is Joe had gotten a concussion. They'd taken him off the field. He was knocked out. And so now he's coming to, and Dwight is kneeling over him. They're best friends, basically seeing how he was. And the irony of that photo is Dwight's now no longer with him, died a couple years ago of Lou Gehrig's disease that he was convinced was caused by the number of concussions he got in football. And Joe has had 10, 12 surgeries since football.
Right.
So
and are you still in touch with Joe? Are you still friends with Joe?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, we're still friends.
Right. All right. And then, we got this shot of Dwight back in the locker room again, sad that we lost him a few years ago. And then there's this great shot of you running down the field with your gear. Michael, I want to thank you so much for telling your stories. I love listening to you talk. I love looking at your photos. Hopefully everybody got a good glimpse into what it was like in the 1970s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll with Michael Zagaris. Total Excess. Harrison, do we have any questions for Michael before we wrap this up?
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions. So
all right.
First question is from Janice in Las Vegas. And Janice wants to know, what is your favorite film camera for concert photography?
My favorite? Well, it's when I shot back in the day, I was shooting Nikon. I switched to Canon in the late 90s because at that point in time, Canon came out with autofocus and it was the best. Now, that being said, and I use Canon to this day. It's a great camera. They have great lenses and they take care of their professionals. But you know what? There are 3 or 4 cameras that are probably dynamite for photography, for shooting concerts. And as I tell people, it's not about the arrow, it's about the Indian.
Cool. So the next question is from Steve G. And Steve wants to know, what was the most dangerous spot you ever shot from at a concert?
Dangerous? Well, probably in the limo or the hotel room or backstage where what you were doing was dangerous. No, maybe the Sex Pistols show, or an Iggy show. Although, you know what? Honestly, dangerous never entered into my mind as far as that goes. I mean, dangerous is being with James Knockway in a war zone. Or right. Dangerous would have been me staying on stage at Altamont when the Hells Angels were going crazy. But I left the stage right before the Flying Burrito Brothers went on because they were taking like handfuls of reds and whites and washing them down with Red Mountain. And I knew it was going to get really fucking crazy. And that would have been beyond danger.
And our next question is from Rick. And Rick wants to know, did Bill Graham ever get upset with you? And can you remember the instance in which he yelled at you the loudest?
Yeah, I think it was Miles Davis was opening up for the Grateful Dead. And I had scored some acid that was pretty heavy and I'd had a bad week and it was raining in line. And a girl behind me told me how her boyfriend had been shot and killed at the chicken place across the street the next week. And I suddenly thought, pfft. So I dropped the acid and I can't remember the first band, but by the time Miles came on, I was really starting to come on heavy. And it was festival seating and pretty soon there was a big, everybody that was around me, I had like a 10-foot moat. I was trying to give money away and ended up, I wanted to leave, but the Angels were there to see the Dead. They were all coming up the stairs. So I went to Bill, and this is the old Fillmore West. And I said, Bill, you've got to help me, man. Somebody dose me. And I said, I'm really tripping out. And he goes, Michael, you took LSD at Bill Graham's Fillmore West? And I said, Bill. So he took me and he locked me. He had his office in those days was behind the bar. So he locked me in his office, which was a fairly small office, but the entire walls and ceilings were all covered with the Fillmore posters. And when you're tripping, that's kind of the last place you want to be. And so I was like huddled up in a fetal position under Bill's desk. And Bill sent in Johnny Walker, who used to greet everybody at the doors with an apple And then when you left with a poster, he'd go, you know, we're going to kill the sick. We're going to raise the dead. We're going to grow some hair on a bald man's head. Have a lovely day. Well, he was there to talk me down. And Johnny was fucked up on gin. And I remember he got down on his hands and knees so he could relate to me. And he pulled out, he had one of those little fifths of Old Mr. Boston, like the cheapest rock gut gin you could have. And he's nipping on that. He said, here, have some of this. And he told me about his life as a fur trapper in Alaska, where the other foxes would run in the path of the lead fox. When the show was over, I was coming down a little, I remember, and Johnny had like passed out. Bill opens the door, and as I'm leaving, he's looking at me like your father would look at you when you'd really fucked up. And he doesn't even have to talk, just that look, and like, and that was worse than any yell.
Well, on a more positive note, can you tell us about one of your favorite moments with Bill Graham?
There were a lot of them. I couldn't pick out just one. I mean, he used to have parties at his house. I remember when, he called me because they were going to play the Eagles in a softball game. And he said, you were a professional ball player. I said, I played in college. He says, we need you to play in this game. He says, I want to beat these fucking guys. He said, do you know any of the A's or anybody? And I said, well, Bill, they're actually playing. I don't think they can play in this game. So, I showed up. The Eagles showed up in 3 limos, and they had fucking uniforms, like, they were going to the World Series, and like we were the ragtag kids. We kicked their ass. And seeing Bill, it was like we just won the 7th game of the World Series. He had a walk-off home run.
Next, we have a question from Jordan. And Jordan wants to know, what is the most unexpected friendship you've made through photography?
I don't know. I mean, one of the, I've never thought of myself as a photographer, Jordan. I got into this as the camera was giving me access to things that I wanted to do, things I wanted to experience. And because of that, whether you're shooting music, whether you're shooting sports, whether you're shooting fashion, photojournalism, you meet all kinds of people that you never would have ever thought you'd meet. But you know what? I think that life is like that. And I think my life has been an ongoing procession of meeting this person, which leads to meeting this person, which opens the door to this job. It's given me things that I could never have imagined. And I can't think of one particular person. It's more like 50.
Your whole
100.
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your whole life.
Yeah.
Photography really has given us an entree into so many places that, you would never get to go, and meet so many people that you would never meet, if you weren't a photographer. And it's everything from a fan to, a musician, to a promoter, to a security guard, to just, interesting people. And it's those experiences that we get to have as photographers with all of these people that we interact with that, put us where we are right now and make us who we are.
Well, and you know what, John, that's what life's all about. I mean, to me, life is about experience. It's about experiencing people. It's about experiencing things. And that's paramount. And I feel like the fact that I've been able to do this, I'm the luckiest person in the world. And I've said this 100 times. I'll say it again. I feel like I've never had to work a day in my life, because I love, for the most part, what I do and the way I'm been able to do it, although it's more and more difficult now. But as a caveat, because of what I've done and how I do it, when I look at my bank account, I feel like I've never worked a day in my life. But it's okay, because you know what? I do everything again.
And our next question is from Sandra, and Sandra wants to know, are there any artists still on your photography bucket list?
Yeah, but they're dead. I mean, I would have loved to have shot Elvis in 1956 when Wertheimer shot him, because that was like the key. I wish I would have had a camera to chronicle James Brown when I saw him in 64 and 65. I probably saw him 25, 30 times. I'd see him at the Howard Theater in DC. I take a bus to Baltimore to go to the Royal Theater and see him. I take the train to New York to see him at the Apollo. To this day, those shows were some of the most incredible performances, bar none, that I've ever seen. But you know what? You had to be there. If there were footages now of that, it still wouldn't convey the feeling that you got to see James Brown in that environment in that time. And that's what I wish. I mean, anybody new now, it's different. And I think the other thing is, everything that we do and capture, it's not just what you're doing, it's when you're doing it, who you are when you're doing it, what the society is like. It's like seeing the Beatles. You know, you could go to IMAX and see the Beatles Hard Day's Night in Sensurround Sound, IMAX 3D. And in one sense, you get an idea, but unless you were there to feel all the things, to be that age at that moment in time with them, you can't experience it.
And then next we have a question regarding the cover of your book. How did you choose the photo?
You know, Dagan James was the designer and editor with me with the book, and we went through a number of things. But early on, Dagan said, "This is it, don't you think?" And it was like, yeah, it was just never, you know, it's just like certain things just come to you, and at that point in time, you know that that's the picture. And for Total Excess, that was the picture. I mean, even more than, you know, Lou Shooting Up. Lou Shooting Up, that they're not going to rack that in too many places.
Let's do a couple more questions, maybe 2 or 3.
Great. So our next question is from Greg K. And Greg says, you are a music fan as well as a photographer. Have you ever had a time when you knew something magical was happening and put your camera down to enjoy the moment as a fan?
Not really put it down. I remember the first time I shot Gary Clark. Peter Standish had called me from Warner Brothers, and he said, "Hey, we've got this really dynamite new artist. I think you'd really dig, and I can give you tickets to the show if you want." And then he called me back and he said, "Hey, Z, I don't want to impose on you. Would you mind bringing the camera in, taking a few shots for us?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So Kristen and I go to the Fillmore and meet Gary backstage. He's very soft-spoken, didn't have a lot to say. He goes on stage, he starts playing. I'm shooting, but early in the show as he's playing, I'm knocked out. It was like he was channeling Jimi Hendrix, channeling the great blues artists, channeling, I mean, he was so many different genres, brilliant in all of them. I'm kneeling on the side of the stage and I just stopped. And I had my camera like this and I'm kind of like, fuck, this is amazing. You know, kind of like the first time I saw Led Zeppelin and wasn't even a photographer, when they were playing, everybody just had their mouths open. It was like, oh my God. And I remember at the end of that show seeing Country Joe's guitarist,
Barry Melton.
Yeah, Barry was standing on the side of the stage by the amps, and his mouth was open, like because Zeppelin was opening up for them, and I imagine Barry thought, "Oh shit, we have to follow these guys."
And our next question is from Linda, and Linda wants to know, what was the last concert you shot, and do you still go to concerts just for fun?
The last concert I shot was probably, yeah, Gary Clark. I mean, you know what? I rarely shoot concerts anymore because there aren't any bands I really want to shoot the way I shot then, and you can't shoot the way I shot then. And my thing was, I never really wanted to just shoot the band. I wanted to be in the band. And back then, you usually were with the band backstage, and it was you, the band, the road manager, occasionally a girlfriend or two, and the dope dealer. And that was it. And you were all one, and it was as much an experience that the photos were a part of. And it's something you took away from and could share with people. And to me, it was a total experience. And that's why I always wanted to be on the inside and shoot it from the inside out, kind of like from the perspective of the musician or the perspective of a player, where the people that look at the pictures, you can think, fuck, this is what it's like to be in the band. And shooting 2 or 3 things out front live, that's the same thing as being at the show. Or shooting action in football or baseball. You can see that in Sports Illustrated in the newspaper or in the stands. You want to see what it's like behind the scenes.
Right on.
And our next
last question, Harrison.
Our last question. Okay. So let's end with a good one. What advice do you have for someone interested in pursuing a photography career?
Go to law school?
Be old money. Be like Peter Beard. And all kidding aside, photography as a career, especially if you're talking about music or sports or fashion, if you're in it to make money the way a lot of people in America think about, I'm going to do this and make a lot of money. You're not going to make a lot of money. And sadly, you can't even get access and make much, if any, money in the music business. The labels, the bands, they want to make not only the money, they want to control the access, they want to control the message. So you're merely a person, much like a worker in the movie Metropolis. You're there to push the button. In sports, it's the same thing. The leagues want to have all the money flowing in their direction. So if you're going to approach this, you better approach it from the point of view of, I want to make the pictures I want to make, if possible, the way I want to make them, and not worry about and get a house and get this and get that. And I'm not trying to discourage anybody, because I really think and I believe if you want something hard enough, you'll find a way to do it and make it happen. But making a lot of money, or making even much more than maybe a living, the way things are now, very difficult.
That's for sure. I mean, you can make money, you just can't, it's hard to make a living. That's, at the end of the day, that's really what the story is. So
yeah,
Michael, thank you so much. Thank everybody. Want to thank everybody for watching and listening. Hope this was an entertaining and educational experience here on a Sunday morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. Michael Zagaris can be found on Instagram at Michael Zagaris. You can find him on the field with the 49ers or the A's. Wave to him and say, hey, if you see him out there. or at a Super Bowl if they ever let us do any of those things together. The last concert me and Michael shot together was The Who. I don't remember. Was that in Oakland or San Jose? I can't remember. A couple years ago, 3 years ago.
Oh yeah, the Who at Oakland.
Yeah, that was the last thing.
When they did the 3-number thing there.
Yeah. I just went up in the audience and shot the whole show. I just went and found a good seat.
I remember you did that at Dylan when nobody was supposed to shoot.
Oh,
You're next to us in the front row going.
Yeah, in '88. Yeah, I got pictures of Neil Young and Dylan together. But anyway, so Michael, thank you again. Thanks to fans.com, Harrison, Jonathan Healy, Pete Shapiro, Steph May. Michael, stay safe, stay healthy. Same for everybody else out there in the land of Corona. Let's all hope and pray that we can get through this. Visit headcount.org to learn about how we can vote the politicians out of office that you don't want to be in office anymore. Michael took pictures of Lou Reed shooting heroin on stage. Some people want you to shoot bleach up and think that will cure you of Corona. Please do not do that. It is not a healthy thing to do. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay with your family, love the ones you're with. And thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Fight the power. And all kidding aside, everybody, we're at a pivotal spot in the history of this country and the world. And everybody's going to have to get out at some point and do something, even if it's at great risk. No joke.
This is true. All right. Thanks, everybody. Happy Sunday. We'll see you again soon. We'll try and do another one of these in a few weeks with another legendary photographer. I've got some people in mind. All right. Cheers.